In the busy city of Coimba, the hospital was filled with the sounds of rushing nurses and echoing footsteps, but inside one small room, everything felt still and heavy with expectation. Zuri lay on the hospital bed, her face shining with sweat as she gripped the sheets and fought through the waves of pain. Every contraction tore through her body like fire, yet her heart was filled with hope. Beside her, Maliko sat close, holding her trembling hand. He leaned in, whispering soft words. "Stay strong, my love, we're almost there." His voice was steady, his face calm, and Zuri believed him. She believed this was their moment, the beginning of a new chapter, the miracle they had prayed for. Between cries, she pictured holding her baby for the first time, wrapping the little one against her chest, and seeing Maliko's eyes shine with pride. She thought of the laughter that would soon fill their home, of sleepless nights that would no longer feel like burdens but blessings. Through the pain, she smiled weakly and whispered, "Our baby, our dream is here." She had no idea that while her body fought to bring life into the world, her husband's heart carried a secret that would shatter hers. Maliko sat beside Zuri, nodding, holding her hand, acting like the perfect husband. His eyes looked worried on the outside, but inside, his thoughts were far away from the delivery room. For months he had been living a double life, secretly seeing a woman named Salia. She was bold, confident, and had convinced him that she was the one who truly understood him. Slowly, Maliko's heart drifted from his wife, and though he still lived under the same roof with Zuri, his loyalty belonged elsewhere. In his twisted mind, he thought of a plan that would prove to Salia that she was more than just a mistress. He wanted to make her feel permanent in his life, to give her something bigger than promises whispered in the shadows. And so, while Zuri lay in pain, bringing his child into the world, Maliko carried an idea so cruel that only a man blinded by selfishness could imagine it. He wanted to register the baby under Salia's name. The thought made him feel powerful. He told himself it was clever, that no one would ever know. After all, who would question a husband's actions when his wife was too weak to even stand? As Zuri screamed through contractions, Maliko secretly smiled to himself, imagining Salia's reaction when he would reveal what he had done. "She will finally know how much she means to me," he thought. But what Maliko forgot was that betrayal never hides forever. A mother's bond to her child cannot be erased with ink on a paper. Still, he sat there, pretending to be the supportive husband, brushing Zuri's forehead with his hand, whispering fake words of comfort, while deep inside, he was planning the ultimate act of disloyalty. Zuri trusted him completely, blind to the storm that was already gathering above her fragile joy. The night felt endless for Zuri. Each contraction came like a wave crashing over her body, leaving her breathless and weak. She clutched the sheets, crying out in pain, her voice echoing down the hospital corridor. Nurses rushed in and out, adjusting her drip, checking her pulse, telling her to breathe slowly. Sweat soaked her gown, her hair stuck to her face, but through the agony she kept reminding herself, "This pain will end with a blessing. My baby will be worth it." Maliko leaned close, his voice calm, his touch gentle. "I'll take care of everything," he said softly, brushing her forehead. Zuri nodded, trusting him, too exhausted to question. When he suddenly stood and said he needed to handle some paperwork for the baby, she believed him. Of course, that was what a responsible husband would do. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "Please, make sure they write her name the way we chose." Maliko squeezed her hand and promised, "Don't worry, my love, I'll do everything right." Then he walked out of the room. But as Zuri struggled alone, fighting through the burning pain of labor, Maliko was not filling the forms with her chosen name. He was carrying out his hidden betrayal. While she cried for him, whispering prayers for strength, he was smiling slyly at the desk, pretending to be the dutiful father while secretly writing another woman's name on the papers meant for her. Hours dragged on for Zuri. Every second felt like an eternity. She prayed for her child's safe arrival, imagining Maliko returning with the documents that would carry their family's name, never knowing that with every push she gave, he was pushing her deeper into heartbreak. The night was long, but her faith carried her, blind to the storm that was waiting at the edge of dawn. At the registry desk, Maliko held the pen tightly in his hand. The nurse slid the form toward him, speaking quickly about the details that needed to be filled in. Most men at that desk were nervous with excitement, their hands shaking as they proudly wrote their wives' names beside their newborn child's. But Maliko was different. He wasn't trembling with joy, he was plotting. His eyes scanned the page, and when he reached the space that asked for the mother's name, his lips curled into a sly smile. Without hesitation, he didn't write Zuri. He didn't write the name of the woman who had cried through months of pregnancy, who was even now screaming in the next room, fighting for their child's life. Instead, he carefully wrote Salia. Each letter was carved with betrayal, every stroke of the pen a stab into the trust Zuri had placed in him. In his twisted mind, this was victory. He thought of how proud Salia would be when he told her. He imagined her smile, the way she would laugh and say, "Now I know you are mine." The nurse glanced at the paper but didn't question it. To her, Maliko looked like just another tired but responsible husband. He signed at the bottom with confidence, convinced that his secret would stay hidden forever. He even leaned back in the chair, feeling powerful, as though he had outsmarted everyone. What Maliko didn't realize was that truth has a way of sneaking through even the smallest cracks. The paper he had just filled out wasn't a shield. It was a weapon that would one day turn against him. While he smiled at the thought of his mistress's name printed boldly where his wife should have been, fate was already preparing to reveal his sin. He walked away from the desk thinking he had won, blind to the fact that the ink he left behind was not loyalty. It was the beginning of his downfall. The hours of agony finally broke with a sound that changed everything. A sharp cry pierced the air inside the ward, strong and full of life. Zuri's body trembled as the nurses lifted the tiny newborn into the world. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, she turned her head just enough to see the small bundle wrapped in a clean white cloth. The moment her eyes landed on the baby girl, her pain melted into tears of joy. Her chest rose and fell heavily as she stretched out her weak arms. When the nurse placed the baby against her, Zuri felt a warmth that no words could describe. The little one's cries softened the second she touched her mother's skin, as though she knew she was finally home. Zuri kissed her baby's forehead again and again, her tears soaking the soft cloth. "Welcome, my love," she whispered through shaky breaths. "You are my light, my blessing, my whole world." The nurses smiled quietly, moved by the tenderness of the moment. For Zuri, the room no longer smelled of medicine and pain. It smelled of new life, of hope, of love too deep for words. She studied her daughter's tiny fingers, curling perfectly around her own, and marveled at how such a small being could carry such power. In her mind, she already dreamed of the life they would share. First steps, first words, laughter in their home. This was the child she had prayed for, the child she had carried through restless nights and swollen days. Zuri believed this moment sealed her bond with Maliko forever, that their family was finally complete. She did not know that just outside the ward, the man she trusted had already broken that bond with the stroke of a pen. But for now, in that sacred moment, all she saw was her angel, the little girl who had made every tear, every cry, every ounce of pain worth it. Zuri lay back against her pillows, her baby resting peacefully on her chest. She was exhausted but glowing with joy, staring at the tiny face that had already stolen her heart. The door creaked open, and a nurse walked in holding a folder of documents. With a polite smile, she said, "Madam, these are the registration papers for your baby. Just a routine check." Zuri nodded weakly and reached out. Her hands were still trembling from the delivery, but she wanted to see her daughter's name written officially for the first time. She imagined the pride she would feel seeing her own name, Zuri Nambela, beside her child's. But as her tired eyes scanned the paper, her smile faded. Something wasn't right. She blinked, thinking maybe the medication or exhaustion was making her see wrongly. She looked again, her heart beginning to race. Her name wasn't there. At the space that should have proudly carried Zuri, there was a strange emptiness, something off, something that didn't belong. Her throat tightened. Why isn't my name here?" she whispered, her voice soft but filled with confusion. The nurse paused, frowning as she took the paper back and flipped through it carefully. She wasn't used to seeing mistakes in such important forms. "That's odd," she murmured, her brow creasing deeper with every page she turned. "The section for the mother's details. It doesn't look right." Zuri's chest tightened with unease. A cold shiver ran through her body, cutting through the warmth she had been basking in just moments ago. She held her baby a little closer, suddenly feeling protective. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but she couldn't yet put it into words. The room, once filled with joy, now felt heavy with questions. She glanced at the door, wondering where Maliko was, why he hadn't come back yet, and why her name, her rightful place as the child's mother, was missing from the very papers that were supposed to honor her sacrifice. Deep inside, a seed of doubt had been. Maliko returned to the ward with a forced smile, acting as though everything was normal. He leaned over Zuri, kissed her forehead, and pretended to be the caring husband once more. But the papers he had filled out were already in the nurse's hands, waiting for final verification. He thought he had been clever, that his little trick would pass unnoticed. What he didn't realize was that hospitals in Coimbra had strict rules that no amount of lies could bend. The nurse, still frowning, checked the form again and tapped her pen on the page. "Sir," she said carefully, "this document is missing the mother's fingerprint." She looked at Maliko with questioning eyes. "Why didn't you ask your wife to provide it?" Maliko froze for a split second. His mind raced, but he quickly forced a chuckle. "Oh, she was in too much pain," he said, waving his hand casually. "I thought maybe it wasn't necessary." But the nurse wasn't satisfied. She shook her head firmly. "No, sir. The mother's fingerprint is the law. Without it, the registration is incomplete." She glanced at Zuri, who was now staring at both of them, suspicion building in her tired but sharp eyes. That was the slip Maliko hadn't calculated. His arrogance had blinded him. In his rush to prove his loyalty to Salia, he had forgotten the most important detail, the mark of the real mother. Without Zuri's fingerprint, the paper meant nothing. The nurse gently turned the document toward Zuri. "Madam, could you please confirm the details before we proceed?" she asked. Zuri's eyes fell on the words written in bold ink. Her chest tightened as she read them, and her lips trembled. That was not her name. It was someone else's. The room grew silent, the air heavy with tension. Maliko shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat beginning to form on his forehead. He had tried to erase his wife with a pen, but the missing fingerprint had exposed everything. His betrayal, hidden only minutes ago, now stood wide open, staring Zuri into. The nurse's eyes lingered on the form for a moment longer before she carefully folded it against her chest. She walked closer to Zuri's bed and lowered her voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "Madam," she said gently, "can I ask you something?" Zuri looked up, still cradling her newborn, her face pale from exhaustion but alert. The nurse placed the paper in her hands and pointed to the blank space where the mother's signature and fingerprint were supposed to be. "Did you approve this name? Because this section here, it hasn't been signed." Zuri frowned, confused at first, then slowly lowered her eyes to the document. She expected to see her own name written proudly in black ink, the confirmation of her place as her child's mother. But as her gaze moved across the page, her chest tightened. Her breath caught in her throat. The name written there was not hers. It was Salia. For a moment, the world around her seemed to blur. The beeping machines, the chatter of nurses outside the door, even the soft breathing of her baby, all of it faded into silence. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the paper tighter, unable to believe what she was seeing. She whispered the name under her breath, "Salia." Her heart felt like it had been pierced. The nurse looked at her carefully, sensing the storm rising behind her silence. "Madam, is this correct? Should I proceed?" Zuri's lips quivered, her eyes filling with tears she fought to hold back. She could barely form words, but inside her, rage and heartbreak were colliding. She turned her head slowly toward the door, where Maliko had just been standing moments ago, pretending to be her strength. In that instant, the truth was no longer hidden. It was there in black and white, written by the very man who had promised to protect her. The betrayal wasn't a rumor, it wasn't a suspicion. It was printed clearly on her daughter's first document. And Zuri felt her whole world shatter. Zuri's hand shook as she clutched the paper, her baby pressed close against her chest. The nurse quietly slipped out, sensing the storm about to erupt. Zuri's eyes were red with tears, but behind the weakness of her tired body burned a fire Maliko had never seen before. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from fury held tight in her throat. "Maliko," she called, her tone sharp and cold. He walked back into the room casually, forcing a smile as though nothing was wrong. "Yes, my love? How are you feeling?" he asked, trying to sound gentle. Zuri lifted the paper with trembling hands, pointing at the name written boldly across it. "Whose name is this?" Her voice cracked, but her gaze was steady, piercing through him. Maliko's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came out. For a moment he just stood there frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. Sweat gathered on his forehead, trickling down the side of his face. It must be a mistake, he stammered, his voice uneven. Zuri laughed bitterly, though tears streamed down her cheeks. A mistake? You think I don't know my own name? You think I can't read? Look at it, Maliko. That is not me. That is not the woman who carried this child inside her for 9 months, who nearly died to bring her into this world. He reached out, desperate to calm her, but she pulled back sharply, clutching the baby protectively. Don't touch me. Don't touch her. Tell me now, who is Salia? Maliko's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But no excuse seemed strong enough to stand in front of Zuri's burning eyes. His lies had no shield anymore. The truth was standing naked in that room, exposed by his own arrogance. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream, and in that silence, Maliko knew his betrayal had been caught in the light of day. The confrontation did not stay inside Zuri's room for long. In hospitals, walls have ears and secrets travel faster than footsteps. A nurse walking past had overheard Zuri's trembling voice. Another staff member caught a glimpse of the form. Within minutes, whispers began to flow through the corridors like wildfire. Who is Salia? Someone asked quietly near the reception. Why is her name written on the baby's papers? Another murmured, their voice filled with curiosity and shock. Soon, even visitors waiting outside leaned in closer, repeating the question that now seemed to be on everyone's lips. Back in the ward, Maliko stood frozen, his face pale, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. He tried to compose himself, but the shame clung to him like a shadow he could not escape. Every time he opened his mouth to speak, his lips trembled, yet no words came. He didn't have to answer. His silence, his trembling, and the guilt written across his face told the truth louder than any confession could. Zuri sat on the bed, her baby clutched tightly in her arms, tears falling freely down her cheeks. The humiliation burned, but beneath it was a sharp sense of clarity. She had given her life to this man, trusted him with her heart, and in her most vulnerable moment, he had betrayed her for another woman. Outside the room, the whispers grew bolder. So Maliko has a mistress? He wrote her name on his own child's birth papers? The disbelief turned quickly into anger, then disgust. People shook their heads, some even spitting on the ground, muttering curses at his cruelty. Maliko looked around the room, realizing the walls were closing in on him. His carefully guarded secret was no longer hidden in shadows. The name Salia was now echoing through the hospital, each whisper stripping away the image of the proud, respected man he once pretended to be. His shame was no longer private, it had become public property. Maliko had always carried himself with pride. He walked with his chest high, spoke with authority, and demanded respect everywhere he went. In Zuri's family, he was seen as the man who had everything under control, the husband who could never be questioned. But in that hospital room, with one piece of paper exposing his lies, all that power slipped from his hands. His voice cracked as he tried to explain himself. It was a mistake, he muttered, forcing a weak smile that fooled no one. The nurse must have written it wrong, or maybe I was too tired, I didn't realize. But his words sounded empty, even to his own ears. He shifted uncomfortably, wiping the sweat dripping down his forehead, looking smaller and weaker with every second. Zuri, her body still sore from labor, sat upright on the bed with a strength that surprised even herself. She pulled her baby closer, shielding her like a lioness protecting her cub. When Maliko stretched out his hand, attempting to touch the child, she snapped sharply. You don't get to touch her. Her words cut through the air like a blade. Everyone watching, nurses, relatives, even strangers who had gathered near the door, felt the weight of her pain. Maliko's shoulders slumped. His mouth opened, but no defense could hold against the truth written in bold ink. The proud husband who once commanded attention now looked like a coward caught red-handed. His eyes darted around the room, searching for sympathy, but there was none. All he saw were faces of disappointment and disgust. His image, carefully built over years, crumbled in just a moment. Zuri, holding her baby with tears in her eyes, looked at him not with love, but with a mix of pity and rage. You tried to erase me, she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. But you forgot. I am the one who carried this child, not her. Nothing you do can change that. And with those words, Maliko's mask of pride shattered completely. He was no longer the man in control. Zuri's body ached, every muscle still trembling from the storm of labor, but inside her chest burned a fire no one could put out. She looked straight at Maliko, her eyes swollen with tears but shining with strength. Her baby lay against her heart, breathing softly, completely unaware of the storm around her. Zuri tightened her grip, as if drawing power from the tiny life she had just brought into the world. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of truth. "You wanted to erase me," she said slowly, her words cutting through the room like thunder. "You thought a piece of paper could replace me. But you forgot one thing. No child enters this world without their mother." Her breath shook, but she continued, her tone firm, unshakable. "My blood, my pain, my life, this child is mine. Not yours to give away. Not hers to claim." The nurses standing nearby lowered their eyes, moved by her strength. Even the visitors at the door stood in silence, the weight of her words sinking deep. Maliko shifted on his feet, his pride gone, unable to look her in the eye. For once he had no power, no excuse, no control. Zuri lifted her baby gently, kissing her forehead. "I carried her for 9 months," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Every kick, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, I gave it all. You weren't the one who nearly died bringing her into this world. I was. And nothing you write, no name you try to replace can ever change that." Her words were not only for Maliko. They were for every woman who had ever been silenced, betrayed, or pushed aside. Her voice became a shield, her pain a sword. In that moment, Zuri was not just a weak new mother, she was a warrior. She had lost her trust, but not her dignity. And holding her baby in her arms, she made a silent vow that no betrayal, no man, and no mistress would ever take away what was rightfully hers. By the next morning, the story had already left the walls of the hospital. In Coimbra, news traveled faster than fire, and people loved nothing more than a scandal. By midday, everyone seemed to know what Maliko had done. Men in barbershops shook their heads, women at the markets whispered over baskets of fruit, and boda riders laughed loudly as they repeated the story to their passengers. "Did you hear? Maliko tried to register his child under his mistress's name," one man said, slapping his knee in disbelief. "Imagine the shame," another replied. Soon the story became the talk of the whole city. People mocked him openly. Some said, "What kind of man betrays his wife in the delivery room?" Others spat on the ground and muttered, "He doesn't deserve to be called a father." The proud image Maliko once carried crumbled into dust. His name, once spoken with respect, was now coated in laughter and disgust. Even Salia, the mistress he thought would be flattered by his twisted gesture, turned her back on him. When neighbors confronted her, she tried to hide her face, ashamed. She realized she had not been crowned queen of his life. She had been dragged into disgrace alongside him. She too became a subject of gossip. "That's the woman who tried to steal another woman's child," people whispered, shaking their heads. Maliko walked the streets of Coimbra with his head down, no longer the proud man who once demanded respect. His arrogance had made him blind, and now the whole city saw him for what he was, a man who betrayed the very woman who had given him a daughter. Meanwhile, people admired Zuri. They praised her courage for speaking up even in her weakest moment. Her name became tied not to shame but to dignity. And for Maliko, every laugh, every whisper, every mocking glance was a reminder that betrayal once exposed cannot be hidden again. Zuri could have allowed the betrayal to break her, but she refused. She had already survived the hardest battle, bringing life into the world. She told herself she would not waste her tears on a man who had chosen lies over loyalty. With her family by her side, she began to rebuild her life piece by piece. Her mother moved in to help with the baby. Her sisters surrounded her with love, and the community offered encouragement whenever they saw her walking proudly with her little girl. Instead of hiding in shame, Zuri carried herself with dignity. She dressed in bright, beautiful clothes, tied her headscarf high, and walked through Coimbra's markets with her baby wrapped tightly against her chest. People would stop her to greet her, some whispering words of strength, others openly praising her courage. "That's the woman who exposed her husband's greatest shame," they said. And Zuri, though her heart was still healing, lifted her chin higher each time she heard it. She poured her love into her daughter, raising her not in the shadow of betrayal, but in the light of resilience. Every laugh, every small milestone became a reminder that life could still be beautiful, even after heartbreak. The child grew up surrounded not by lies, but by a mother's fierce devotion and the warmth of family. Maliko, on the other hand, was no longer welcome. Zuri made it clear he would never again have the power to decide her child's future. The bond between mother and daughter was unbreakable, and no man could interfere. Her story became an inspiration. Women across Kawemba spoke her name with pride, reminding each other that betrayal does not have to end in silence. Zuri had turned her pain into power, her tears into testimony. And though scars of the past remained, she chose not to live as a victim but as a survivor. Her new beginning was not built on the ruins of Maliko's deceit. It was built on love, courage, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her child. The story of Zuri and Maliko spread far beyond the hospital walls. In Kawemba, people told it like a cautionary tale, a reminder that secrets may hide for a while, but truth always finds its way to the light. Mothers told their daughters, "Never let anyone erase your worth," and wives whispered to each other, "See how Zuri stood firm even in her weakest moment." Her courage became an echo that traveled from home to home, from market stalls to street corners. Maliko, once known as a proud man, could no longer walk with his head high. Every step he took was followed by whispers, mocking glances, and laughter behind his back. He had tried to build an image of power, but in the end, his own lies had destroyed him. The shame clung to him like a shadow, and even those who once respected him now kept their distance. Zuri, on the other hand, grew stronger with every passing day. She poured her love into her daughter, raising her in dignity and hope. People admired her grace, calling her the woman who turned betrayal into strength. Her pain had become her weapon, and her story inspired others to believe that no matter how deep the wound, healing was possible. The lesson echoed everywhere. A man may lie, he may scheme, he may betray, but the truth will always rise. Maliko lived in disgrace, but Zuri and her daughter walked forward in honor, dignity, and unshakable strength.